Combat is a massive part of Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, from commanding the field as a general to captaining a single unit as a sergeant for another commander, all the way down to the individual one-on-one fighting with an enemy soldier. It's harvesting season everywhere. We've gone through the battle commands in one of my very first videos on this subject, but since then I've grown to appreciate both the AI and the nuance of battle tactics in Mount & Blade. What we're going to discuss today are 3 commands you use in every single battle, but maybe don't quite understand their exact application or what they really can do for you. Charge, advance, and follow me are going to be our focal points here today. We'll discuss how and when you should use each one of these commands and what they really mean. I'd like to throw some quick disclaimers up front here though. This is of course early access, and this information comes to me from an internal beta tester who sat down and really explained a lot of the way the AI approaches battles and how these commands actually work. Furthermore, what I'm going to display and explain is an extremely generalized and watered down explanation of what actually goes on. There are so many little checks that go into each one of these commands that it is heavily dependent on the exact scenario you're running. So, if you try to replicate some of this information and it's a little askew, I do deeply apologize. I'm mainly going to display the intent or the approach behind these commands so that you can better apply them to your army. But before we jump onto the battlefield, let's go to the party screen to discuss some terms I'm going to use. And here we are yet again in my lovely White Scars playthrough. We'll be using Kazate as our example in both inventory and party screens, as well as the custom battle we'll jump into after all of this. So in the inventory screen, you see you have 4 equipment slots on the right for melee weapons, shields, and ranged weapons. What's important about this screen is noting what's in the top slot. So for me, for example, it's my Noble Bow. This is the number 1 slot for your weapons, followed by, of course, number 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. The charge command will look at these slots to determine which weapon to draw when attacking the enemy. So I wanted to cover this now so that it made sense when we jump into the battlefield. Moving over to the party screen, we can see all of our troops. When we jump into the battlefield, we'll be using Kazate Lancers, Archers, and then Kazate Horse Archers. Let's take a look at some of those skills and the equipment on them. Now, I don't have any actual Kazate Lancers, I just have Heavy Lancers because this is kind of an elite cavalry force, but the Kazate Elite Lancer will do for what I'm about to explain. So looking at this Heavy Lancer, spinning him around and kind of modeling for us, we see 3 things: a shield, a polearm, and a sword. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to tell which weapon is in the corresponding weapon slots we explained earlier. Even after looking at the JSON metadata from the game files, I still can't tell if it's just listing the equipment or if it's in the equipment in the relevant weapon slots. But we can again see the armament of this Lancer. Same thing with the Horse Archer, 2 quivers, a bow, and then obviously a sword right here. Now, moving over to the Kazate Archer itself, we just have a bow, a quiver, and then the sword itself. Now, that we've nailed down what the equipment that they have access to, let's look at their skills relative to that equipment. Keep in mind, these skills will fluctuate across the many versions of the game, but the overall methodology of what we're going to talk about how these skills apply to the commands should be relevant in perpetuity. So looking at the Kazate Lancer first, I'll just go to this one right there. We can see that he has 3 primary focuses for his skills: 100 polearm, 100 sword, and 100 riding. The reason this is important is because the advance command will look at these skills when determining how the unit will respond on the combat map, choosing the best skill and weapon for their assigned role. Moving to Horse Archers, we see that they have 100 one-handed, 100 bow, and 100 riding. And then lastly, over here to the Kazate Archers, we see that there's a bit of a swap with 90 one-handed, 110 bow, and 100 100 riding on these. That's a bit of a bug. That obviously should be in athletics. But again, this is in early access, and that will change over time. Quick side note though, if you've ever wondered how the other combat skills come into effect, they're treated as a sort of priority list for the soldier in battles where their weapon isn't optimal, or they're in a mixed unit where the majority is one skill over the other. For a good example here would maybe the Kazate Archers in number 2, your bound number 2 party ability. let's say you've got 10 archers, and then for some reason you've got 2 Khazate spear infantry in that unit. Well, the infantry will now look in the immediate surrounding area for a throwing weapon because they've got 60 throwing skill. If they can't find a throwing weapon, they'll jump down to bow, then to crossbow, because they want to try and match the AI of both the assigned unit and the majority of that unit. So it's a super niche scenario, but I just thought I'd explain it. So now that we have the equipment, the skills, and the terminology established, before we move on to the battlefield, there's one last thing I want to take a look at, and it's the formations right here. These formations, I want you guys to kind of take a look at rather than bound number keys 1 through 10, or I guess 1 through 8. They are actually AI profiles. So you're saying, okay, that anything in the number 1 category is infantry, anything in the number 2 category is ranged, and they will respond thusly using the skills of that corresponding category. Now, as this kind of breaks down, the first 4 are very generic, right? Then you get into skirmishers, which, again, like wildling skirmishers, which primarily use throwing weapons and shields. And you get to heavy infantry when you take a look at stuff like legionaries, or even the Darkan up here, which have different helmets. And then the light cavalry, when you take a look at stuff like, I would even say Equite could be put in that light cav bracket, or when you look at heavy cavalry, when you especially look at Imperial Elite cataphracts. So assigning units to these relevant formations will actually change their target priority and will change the way that they use their weapons and their skills. Again, let's say you're putting a bunch of Khazate Khazate infantry into the range slot, they will try to prioritize using ranged abilities if they can, if they have the armament or quick access to it. It's not a surefire way. It's a super quick check. They're not going to stumble about, look around and go, oh, can't throw a branch. Well, on to the next thing. So the formations are really important, and I don't really know 100% how they actually expand out. I do know that heavy cavalry, for example, will try to target other heavy cavalry, and then they will move on to archers, and they will try to use their pole arms as best they can before jumping into melee combat as fast as possible. Whereas light cavalry, from what I understand, will use pole arms to charge and then immediately swap over to their melee weapons and try to essentially cycle charge. But those profiles are, again, very skewed depending on certain variables in the game files that I'm not 100% sure on. So this might be something that takes some time to fully implement into the game, but I wanted to at least explain that formations are more AI profiles than actual numbers on your keyboard. Let's jump into the battlefield now to talk about the 3 commands that we've discussed so far. So here's our custom battle menu before we jump into the start button, and I'm probably going to have to recycle the map until we get one that's actually daylight. Sometimes at night it's really hard to see. So what we're going to be having here is about 15% archers, 30% cavalry, and then 54% horse archers. And this is going to be how we're going to exemplify some of these commands coming into full motion, but I wanted to kind of talk about how we're going to split our army up. Now I'm going to put, just doesn't really matter, 100 men for this for the sake of right now, so I can explain some of the commands, and we're just going to keep this individual on party side attackers, that's myself, so they should just stay in defense, especially since they're outnumbered with just 1 man. So this will help us out in explaining stuff, and also if you want to replicate this, these are the settings that I've taken. So let's jump now into the actual map. Alright, so here we are, and we got lucky, it's a daytime map, so let's take a look here. These are just my normal cavalry lancers, and we have my archers here on the left, and then on the further left we have our horse archers. Now they all have their swords out because I told them to hold fire. Now the first thing I want to explain is the follow me command. This is not just a simple command in which you just tell your units to follow you. Essentially think of it as mirror me, and the unit will follow you to the best of its ability. If it gets caught with combat with another enemy, then it will try to fight its way out. If it starts to lose a certain percentage of health, it will stop trying to fight its way out and just fight the enemy until you get close enough that it can try to break free. The AI is actually, we kind of make the mistake of thinking that the AI is very dumb. That, okay, I'm just going to press charge and it's going to be a slog. Well, the AI looks at the way you are approaching the battlefield and goes, okay, well, if that's what you're going to do, that's what I'm going to do. If you're going to just charge down the front, then I am going to as well. And it will respond to your tactics very, very adaptively. It's pretty insane. The way that the internal beta tester explained it to me is that the AI is going to match your tactics and try to beat them slightly. It's not going to try and completely trounce you by flanking around you and doing what it needs to do. It's going to try to take the most optimal route to do what it has to do to beat you. So when we take a look, I'm using obviously the camera mod. When we take a look at our units, we'll take our bros here. Doesn't matter to have them fire well. So I'm going to say, follow me. Now, they're going to reposition here. They'll pull out, anytime they move, they're going to pull out lances. Then once they stop moving, they're going to pull out swords again. Because their weapon choice should again mirror me. So it takes a little second for them to kind of kick in. If I switch over to a lance, they're going to switch over to a lance as well. If I have a bow, they can't do that, so they'll switch over to something that is assumed, not a melee, a close combat melee weapon like a sword is. So if I charge forward in this direction, switch over to a lance, you can see here that they're all starting to do the same. And of course, Manchung has like the fastest horse known to man. Look at this. And the best way to use these guys, I'll exemplify it when we do the actual skirmish fight, is actually pulling them through. You do minimal actual contact with the enemy. Let's assume this group of trees was the enemy. The best way to use follow me is pulling them through. You pull them through to this location, and you just kind of keep circling around. You want them to constantly be pulling through the unit you're attacking and come back around into it. You do a very minimal amount of attacking when you're doing the follow me command. The point here is that you want this unit to use its combat abilities, hit them with their pole arms, and then keep pushing through. So using follow me in this scope will actually be very advantageous for you. And as you're approaching enemy archers, or as you're approaching other cav, they will attempt to keep using the pole arm as best that they can. If they're locked into close combat, they will switch on over to their swords. And if I stop, they assume we're getting into combat, and they all start pulling out their swords. Their speed will dictate if they pull out their lance or not, even if you have one out, because it's trying to say, okay, I am a cavalry unit. I'm trying to be the best cavalry unit possible, which means my pole arm is what's going to allow me to do the max amount of damage. The AI will constantly be looking at its speed relevant to its weapons choices to determine which one is going to be used in the combat. It's not so straight and simple as, okay, A plus B is equal C, then this is what's going to happen. So I realize that maybe that sounds a little contradictory to what I said earlier, but the unit is going to try to do what you're doing to the best of its ability. And how this is then changed into the commands charge and advance, we then have to take a look at the individual unit we're taking a look at. So these are cavalry units. If I were to press charge, they would switch to their number 1 weapon slot as soon as they got in range of the enemy. If this is a ranged weapon, they would switch to the next slot, so on and so forth. Polearm is not considered a melee weapon for the AI, unless their polearm skill is the highest. And that's an advanced command. But charge will make sure that they pretty much throw a band into the wind and go right for the enemy. The way this works for archers is they'll run close to the enemy, use their bow and arrow, and then as soon as the enemy pushes just a little bit, they'll pull out a sword and charge in. If you use the advance command, they will use the weapon they have the highest amount of skill with, or the weapon that corresponds most with their unit type, and use it to the best of its ability. Now, what I mean by that for cavalry, they will pull out pole arms if you put them in an advance, and they will try to cycle charge, quote unquote, the enemy as best that they can. And it will also change their attack priority. Advance will make it so that the cavalry will try to go for archers first. If they're blocked by other cavalry, they will hit the other cavalry. And then they will try to go for the archers once those cavalry units are killed. Now, this is all, of course, assuming that it all goes off without a hitch and there's nothing that gets in the way. If they come in contact with infantry, they're going to attack the infantry. They're not going to run away from them. They won't run away from a battle that they think that they can win. And advance will make sure that they try to use their polearms to their best ability until they have to use their melee weapons. Charge, of course, forces a melee weapon onto the unit as soon as its equipped weapon cannot be used to the best of its ability. And I understand that it is a little confusing, and it'll make a little bit more sense when we see this in person. But I'd say the only unit that should almost always be using the charge command is horse archers, because horse archers, what they're going to do is if you tell them to charge, they will always attack to the left, and they will circle around the opponent as best that they can. And we'll see this exemplified in the fight as we go through it in a little bit. So, when you use horse archers, they're going to focus on the enemy archers, but as soon as they come in contact with cavalry, they will try to shoot apart the cavalry as fast as possible. So using charge on them, they will always flank to the right and shoot to the left, and then they will charge around in circles, shooting to the left. And then your archers back here, if I tell them to charge, again, they're going to close distance, and then if something gets close to them, they'll pull out their swords and they'll attack. If I use advance, they will constantly try to use their best ability, or their best skill, which is, as we saw, 110 bow. And you know what, guys? You are just hampering things right now. Go over there. Be useful over there. But the archers will use that bow to the best of its ability, maintaining range, always trying to stay at max range, running away from things that charge them, especially enemy cavalry. They'll try to scatter and shoot across and into enemy cav that charges through their center. So the advance command is what you should be using almost all of the time. Even if you have infantry that has mixed units in it that have throwing weapons, if you use advance, then that infantry brigade, the block, will advance close to the enemy, throw their range weapons, their thrown weapons, and if they start to get charged, they will continue to stay at range and throw those ranged weapons until they're out of range weapons, and then they will pull out their weapon that they've got the best skill with and attack. If you tell them to charge, they'll pull out their number one weapon slot, which is more often than not is a sword, and just attack willy-nilly. So that's the hard difference between charge and advance, and it is a very interesting dichotomy, especially for horse archers, where charge is what you want to use with them because advance means that they'll always stay at range of their bows, which is maybe it's just a little wonky thing with their AI. But let's jump now into an actual battle to see how this applies. And this might kind of fall apart as we come across things because the terrain will dictate certain stuff. There's going to be all sorts of factors that kick into it, but I'll try to exemplify what we've talked about to the best of its ability. So here we are back on the battlefield, the battle map. Let's take a look at what we've got. So we've got 100 soldiers versus the 120 Empire. It should be about 65 veteran archer, or sorry, veteran infantrymen, 30 archers, and 24 heavy horsemen. Now I'm going to do some quick preamble here. Let's take our archers. I'm going to put them into a loose formation, and then I'm going to have them advance. Our cavalry, I'm going to have follow me. You can put them in a skein if you want. It won't really matter. And then the horse archers, I'm going to have charge. Remember what we said about charge. If we were to do it on our archers, they would get in range of the enemy, not move, and as the enemy closed distance, they would swap from their bows to their swords. By putting them in advance, they're going to maintain the distance, the max distance possible with their bows, using their best weapon skill to the best of its ability. Now, it is a little funky, like I said, for horse archers. They're just going to keep circling around and doing damage. And then the cavalry, what they'll do is follow me. Now, this is going to make the fight a lot longer than you're probably used to. You're used to having these, okay, the whole army F6 or whole army F1 charge. This is not going to be the same. You're going to actually use tactics here to maintain the army in where it's going to be. And what you're going to see is the infantry is going to run around in circles. They're not going to know what to do. They're going to be torn apart by the horse archers and the archers shooting from multiple directions into them, and they're going to try to have priority on one or the other. But as they keep getting shot, they'll have a hard time using their shields to defend themselves. Will start to get plucked apart. The enemy cavalry will try to charge the horse archers, and then I will pretty much take on the left flank of the cavalry as we're going to bring up that left line. Now, what's really important here in this display is not dying. If I die, because I don't have any companions, no one's got high tactics here to take over my position and kind of run the sergeants, then my whole army is just going to charge. All the tactics I've set up are going to fall apart. So that's kind of a big thing to this if you want to try and replicate it. So I've got my sword out. They should start to kind of swap their lances sometimes, but right now they should mirror me as best as they can. I'm going to switch to a lance. We'll see that if I jump back over here, they're all starting to slowly switch on over to their lances one at a time. See, some still have swords out, some are still pulling them out, and so forth. And I chose this map because it's a nice level map for the most part. And just to kind of, again, exemplify something, you can see that the horse archers, like I said, are charging to the right. They're shooting over their left shoulders to get the max amount of damage that they can from their weapon. That's what they're going to do. Maximize their damage. Moving over to the right flank, running in a Catavian circle around this army. And we will see it go into full effect here. But again, I'm going to pull through. I'm not going to engage these guys. I don't want to take this fight. I want my cavalry to be doing the fighting. But they'll hopefully catch up to me eventually. Unfortunately, Monchung has like the fastest damn horse in the game, it looks like, in the custom battles. So I'm gonna just circle around, and they'll charge into him. I mean, if I take a look at the damage report, I already see that their enemy general just got killed, which kind of skews these results a little bit, so I apologize for that. Don't want to... I can take these little one-on-ones, but I don't want to focus on them. If I focus on them, I could get killed, and that's going to be terrible for my army. And I'm just keeping a real tight circle, allowing my men to stay in combat so that they can do the damage. I'm just here to facilitate their movement. That was actually kind of dangerous. I shouldn't have done that. I get a little too trigger happy playing this game. But let's press F10 in here and go back over and kind of show off what's going on. So, like I said, archers are staying at max distance. Their cavalry is even kind of caught in this big giant circle. See how my horse archers are doing their own thing? They're not in circle formation. They kind of create their own circle formation. And, oh man, did they actually focus down all their archers already? Yeah, their priority target is other archers. And it looks like they were able to do the damage that they could and focus them down. And by me taking this portion of cavalry, 12 of them, away from the main fight, it allows this army to do its thing. So I'm going to just go ahead here and press cavalry and advance. So they should use their polearms to the best of their ability, trying to cycle charge into these cavalry units because there are no more archers. And once they deal with them as best that they can, usually they won't kill them 100%, they'll get pretty low. They'll move over to attacking the line. They're no longer focusing on going after me. That guy was a jerk. And my other archers are staying at max range because of the advanced command. It's usually when you play through the game, you'll see the other enemy general go, charge! That's when you can just press 5, F1, charge. Or whatever is a not bound troop choice. Again, I don't want to get too risky here. If they run out of arrows, they'll jump into close combat with their polearms and do the best that they can. But again, you see we were outnumbered, and what they did was they just kind of kept the distance and tore the enemy apart. This is actually a really good thing to exemplify. The AI sometimes has trouble with height, like I was saying, and they kind of got caught up here on this differing height and the trees, and one almost got completely skewered by this little pocket of infantrymen. So, like I said, you have to kind of be mindful of what's going on, watch your troops, let them do their thing, but also kind of, oh, I saw that dude, you're trying to sneak up on me. But let them do their thing, but also, like I said, don't let them get into a situation like this. But you can see my heavy cavalry is dealing with their heavy cavalry over there. It's almost completely killed off. And I chose an army setup here that was representative of how the typical AI is supposed to set up an Empire army. And this was kind of shared with me with the internal beta tester. He was saying they will have around 60% infantry with around 20 to 30% archers, and then the remaining percentage will be in heavy cavalry. So you can see what's happening. And this is, honestly, we chose a pretty cheap setup. I knew that the horse archers, and cavalry would have won the day on just the archers and horse archers alone. This was just kind of to exemplify how they mirror you as best as possible. So I hope this kind of gives you guys a better idea of how these commands actually work. It's not just simply saying, okay, I've loaded into the field of battle, I'm just going to press F1 and I'm going to charge in. F1 and advance in. If you do that, they're all going to march down the pipe, and the AI is going to respond in kind and do the exact same thing to you. So if you feel like the game is a little too static, a little too boring, I encourage you to try and use some of these tactics I've talked about here today. Your infantry, almost always advance them. Your cavalry, advance them, or have them follow you. Horse archers should always be charging, and archers themselves should always be advance or charge to catch up in range with your infantry and then have them advance. So that way they'll be retreating from there, but at least they'll be able to provide cover to your infantry while they march in towards the enemy. With all that, it brings our video to a close. So I hope that this really helps you out in getting a good idea of when to use advance, charge, and follow me as it applies to your individual units across your army. Now again, a huge disclaimer once more, I can't kind of force this enough here. These tactics won't always go off without a hitch. Like I've exemplified here, I've taken a pretty controlled approach to this to try to replicate them as best as I could, but there are so many factors that are going to go into this situation that things will tend to get a little chaotic. By the end of your fight, or about at least the mid-high point, things should look like the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, with things just going all over the place, people in the middle of all sorts of chaos and turmoil. Now, I do still have a video on the community wish list that's going to be coming out here this week. Please, thank you for very much for bearing with me on this one. There's been so many suggestions to kind of seep through and tally up, so that should help out as well when it comes to the future of Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. But again, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know down below what you're feeling about the charge, advance, and follow me commands. Are you using them in a different way than this and it's getting a way better result for you? Or this is not something that you even factored into when you were playing the game and this has really revolutionized the way you play? Or am I just not right? I'm always happy to have the correct information out there for you guys to get a better idea of how you're going to be playing your game. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one and take care.